Welcome to Withdraw Consent. I'm Victor. This is Jack. So in the past, we've posted a video about National Socialism, and basically people are interested in more detail and just going a little bit deeper into it. So that's what we're going to do today.
Okay, and I found this awesome video about fascism, and the guy's kind of even-handed, and I think it's incredible valuable. Even if you're about to flip off right now, just go watch this guy's video. But we got a lot of insight we want to put on it. Now, Victor hasn't seen it. I discussed it with him briefly, and so he's going to get a fresh look on it, and I'm going to come with some ideas. I've watched it one time. I think it's really valuable. Now, let's do the fascism thing real quick, right? So if you got a lowercase f, this guy points out for fascism, you're talking about fascism in general.
Oh, okay.
You know, like you're a fascist. It's a lowercase f. If you have fascism with an uppercase f, then you're talking about Italian fascism under Benito Mussolini.
Oh.
So when people are talking about National Socialism, having aspects of fascism, that's lowercase f. It's general. And he's going to discuss that. But I just want to... So we're going to get to see some stuff. We did a video also on economic fascism. And he only briefly covers what we talked about. But he covers just a lot of different stuff about national spirit, stuff like that. He quotes from Mein Kampf, from a variety of different philosophers. I think it's a terrific video. Let's get into it.
Cool.
Hey, what's up everyone? So today's video is going to be answering one question and one question only. And that is, what is fascism? Fascism has to be a strong contender for one of the most loosely understood words in the political lexicon. And in my opinion, that's probably not going to be changing anytime soon. But if you're someone that wants to develop a tighter understanding of it, this video is going to be targeted for you. To date, there have only ever been two governments that have even remotely uncontroversially been considered fascist. And those are the governments of Italy and Germany, established between World War I and World War II. Calling Germany fascist is slightly controversial, but I'm not going to get into that here. In my opinion, Nazi Germany was fascist, and I think that will become clear as I talk about it in the video. But either way, it shouldn't change my conclusions. You should be able to theoretically drop Germany from my analysis here, and my conclusions should still hold up. But I will talk about Germany in this video. So I'm going to mostly cover Italy first and Germany second, but I will to some extent go back and forth between the two for the sake of comparison. To the surprise of no one, this video will get dark. I'm not going to show anything very graphic, but I'm also not going to intellectually shy away from the subject matter either. And the subject matter will get dark, especially when we cover Germany. So if you're trying to, I don't know, go on a picnic or something after this, this might not be the video for you. But for the rest of us, we're going to cover Italy first and Germany second, and then at the end, we're going to circle out and see what we can say about fascism based on that. And yeah, that's the plan. So we're going to go back to the time and the place where fascism was invented, which was interwar Italy. After the March on Rome in 1922, Benito Mussolini came into power and became the face of fascism known around the world. Mussolini had a background in academia and considered himself something of a philosopher. We're going to get into Mussolini's ideas, but first I think we should get into some of his influences. And a good place to start with that is Gustave Le Bon, whose book The Crowd was of a special interest to Mussolini. By the end of the 1800s, the nature of politics seemed to be changing, and Le Bon believed that civilization was at a turning point. As he wrote, "While all our ancient beliefs are tottering and disappearing, while the old pillars of society are giving way one by one, the power of the crowd is the only force that nothing menaces, and of which the prestige is continually on the increase. The age we're about to enter will, in truth, be the era of crowds." I
was interested. What do you think about that? The age of crowds.
Yeah, I just think of almost like the mob mentality on Twitter and that type of thing. It's just groups of people acting together.
Okay, but what about the French Revolution? It was an age of crowds, chopping off the heads of all just whatever the mob wanted. But why are we in the age of crowds now, though?
Oh, okay.
There weren't crowds previously. There weren't cities previously. Crowds didn't do mob behavior. The storming of the Bastille. I mean,
Yeah. Just maybe as cities grow in size, the crowds get bigger and have more influence.
So cities are the problem.
I don't know, just off the top of my head.
Every episode, for goodness sake.
Bon is describing is the beginning of mass politics. It was a time when politics were getting less elitist and more populistic. So to gain political power in that context, people would have to spend less time targeting educated people and elites, and more time trying to win the support of everyday people, who would then express their support in a crowd. So he argued that that was making politics more simplistic and more homogenous. Le Bon believed that there was something like a psychological law of the mental unity of crowds, which is this idea that when individuals identify with crowds, they to some extent lose their ability to think for themselves, and they instead think with the crowd. So then you have a crowd of like-minded people, which can then be directed and influenced. So in this analysis, crowd psychology acts as a hypnotizer, and individuals in the crowd are hypnotized. So if an individual becomes swept up in a crowd, then all feelings and thoughts are bent in the direction determined by the hypnotizer. Le Bon believed that to sway...
Hold on. Trump is good at this. Hypnotizing the crowd, right? And then he says, get your vaccines, they're very good. Boo. Wait, what happened to the hypnotist? The crowd allows themselves to be hypnotized when they agree with what's being said. Even if what's being said, like he's going to say in a second, you say the thing that they want to hear. Right. That's fine. And then go do the thing. But it's not like they're hypnotized, because then you say, and then we're going to beat up some babies or take a vaccine. You're going to get booed. Right. You're not hypnotized. You're...
Right. But you're all sharing in the energy of the same thoughts that are being portrayed, as long as you're all on the same page. Or even with the vaccine, you're still all on the same page, but it's booing now.
Did you ever watch the video of the crowd at January 6th, when just the crowd being filmed while Trump's speaking?
No.
You know, like there was not one cheer the whole speech. There was not a cheer in the crowd when you're watching the videos of the crowd while he's giving his speech. Not one cheer. Okay, whatever.
A crowd didn't require telling the crowd the truth. What it required was telling the crowd what they wanted to hear and appealing to the crowd's emotions. As he put it, the masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste, preferring to deify error if error seduce them. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim.
That's really good.
Okay, but also this. If a politician's talking to you, do you want them to tell you what you want to hear or not? It just depends what they're going to do.
Okay.
Right?
Maybe. I'm not sure.
No, what I'm saying is he's saying it's bad that these hypnotizers are telling the crowd what they want to hear.
Okay.
But if I'm listening to a politician, I want them to tell me what I want to hear, and then I want them to do the things. Because once they speak the words, they're now bound to do it.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's on the record.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, like, would you go out and say, yeah, I'm not really going to work on your immigration problem. I'm not really going to, I'm going to vote however AIPAC says. But I want them to, you know what I mean? But he's kind of making it sound like they're lying to the crowd. The crowd wants you to commit to the things they want.
Right.
And it looks the same at the end, because you could look afterwards and say, Adolf Hitler, he told them all the things they wanted to hear. Then he got a 98% approval rate because he did the things that they wanted. Okay, well, we'll get into that.
So to gain power in the era of mass politics, it was thought that you would have to simplify your political ideas and win over a crowd of like-minded people that would then express support for them. The best way to do that wouldn't be to be concerned with truth, but rather to emotionally charge your ideas that can get the crowd excited, to tell them illusions that they want to hear. So this is already describing the core assumptions behind fascism.
Wait, he just added that last part. So he read the part about illusions, and then he said, and also everybody related to fascism has no desire for the truth. Because then this is what I was saying. If they're telling you a thing and they go do it, that's good. If they tell you a thing and they don't do it, then that's not good. But he's assuming that all of this talk to the crowds, it's all based on non-truth.
Right. Do you feel like the different political viewpoints are more emotional based than logic based? Just take left and right in the U.S.?
In the United States, yeah, because, right, one is logic and one is
emotion.
something else.
But it's like, I feel sorry for people, and
But it's also like it's illogical. Like the whole premise, you get to mutilate underage children. Underage children.
yeah, but that's, you're trying to be there and allow them to
But you
become themselves. And,
but if you look at the statistics, it doesn't add up though.
but I'm saying
with
it's an
the suicide.
emotional thing. You don't
Okay,
want,
right,
you don't
right.
want to restrain them.
Right, and I'm saying it's illogical.
Right, because that is the illogical.
But it's also illogical on the right that people would say America first and then vote APEC, whatever APEC wants. Well,
Right,
that's
but
actually
that-
very logical too.
That's
'cause they're funding you.
ignorance. I would say that's ignorance. That isn't a lack of logic. In their mind, they've logically figured out that America should be first, but they don't understand the bigger picture of what's going on.
Or they just completely sell out for the money. That's the
But
only way
we're
they can
talking
save
about the
money.
people.
Oh, I'm talking about the
Because he's
politicians.
talking about the crowds want the emotion.
Oh,
And
I see,
I'm saying
yeah.
some crowds want logic and some crowds want emotion.
I agree. And then it's ignorance that they don't understand that the politicians are bought by a
Right.
foreign country. Right. But it's
Yeah.
not talking bad about the voters on the right, the people showing up at the rallies. They are legitimately America first.
Right, but
Even though they don't
they're
understand the
ignorant.
APEC.
Yes,
thing. Gotcha.
correct.
Okay, I'm on board.
Mussolini believed that if the 19th century was the century of individualism, then the 20th century would be the century of collectivism. Mussolini thought that anyone who wasn't thinking in terms of collectivism and mass politics was going to be left behind in the 20th century. So by that, he mostly meant liberals who thought individualistically and conservatives who thought aristocratically. So Mussolini described that as dead energy. One thinker he thought did get it right, at least in that regard, was Karl Marx, which I know is a name that most of us were probably not expecting to hear in this video, but there it is. By the beginning of the 20th century, both of the original founders of classical Marxism had died, and adaptations of Marxism began to flourish. One major path of adaptations went from Marx to Lenin to Stalin and Mao, which is the path that we refer to as Marxism-Leninism. And the other major path went in a very different direction, and that began with George Sorel. Sorel was a heterodox Marxist who thought that it was too narrow to interpret the world through the lens of class and economics, and he thought that we should also look at sociology. So he thought that sociology would have an effect on the revolution. So he specifically thought that in order to create the ideological unity needed for the revolution, people would have to create mobilizing myths. These myths are stories that are supposed to contain all the strongest inclinations of a people.
Where he's going with this unity is he's trying to do this communist stuff to end up describing the 98% approval rating. He's trying to get to the National Socialist German unity. He's going the long way there. He's working the long way there.
Stories that people are inspired by and cherish and hold above criticism. The myth that Sorel chose was the myth of strikes. So Sorel tried to build up this mythology around the idea of strikes to get people to rally around the idea and to start the revolution. Italian fascists liked Sorel's ideas, but they adapted them. So to finish sketching out this path of adaptations, you have Marx, then Sorel, then Mussolini, and Hitler, which is the path of fascism. Although, unlike the path of Marxism-Leninism, by the time you get to Mussolini and Hitler, their ideas don't really resemble Marxism at all. And Hitler was even violently anti-Marxist, which is to say this is a messy chain of influences, and a lot of adaptation happened here. So to finish up the Marxist influence, fascists thought that Marxist movements correctly tapped into the spirit of mass politics. They told a simple story of a binary struggle between good and evil, where regular people were good and elites were evil, in particular financial elites, and within that, good people were deserving, especially deserving of political power. Hitler even tipped his hat to Marxism in that regard, saying, "No movement has operated with such a thorough knowledge of the characteristics of the masses as the Marxist movement," a point he elaborated on in Mein Kampf, saying, "The strong attractive power of the social democracy, yes, of the whole Marxist movement, rested in large part on the homogeneity and hence one-sidedness of the public it addressed. The more seemingly limited, indeed the narrower, its ideas were, the more easily they were taken up and assimilated by a mass whose intellectual level corresponded to the material offered," which in the context of Mein Kampf is actually kind of a backhanded compliment. He was arguing that this is a necessary component for a successful populist movement. But fascists thought that Marxist movements were fatally flawed and therefore likely to fail. To name a couple reasons why, they were inherently divisive. They turned one part of the population against the other, working class against property owners. And they also tended to be dogmatic. They tended to rigidly adhere to Marx's ideas, whether they worked in practice or not. So fascists thought that thinking that that would work was wishful thinking, and they thought that something new had to be thought up. As Mussolini said in his autobiography, "It was necessary to imagine a wholly new political conception, adequate to the living reality of the 20th century, overcoming at the same time the ideological worship of liberalism, the limited horizons of various spent and exhausted democracies, and finally, the violently utopian spirit of Bolshevism." So they needed a galvanizing idea, an idea that crowds could rally around, something that excites people and binds them together. Something they thought wasn't doing that was internationalism. As Mussolini put it, "I saw that internationalism was crumbling. The unit of loyalty was too large." So he thought that internationalism wasn't an idea that people could feel passionate about and rally around. And here he is on the next page, following that to his conclusion. Facing this new situation, every political man, including myself, began to examine his conscience. The mere mention of this problem was sufficient to make clear and evident the hidden travail of national consciousness. I was transformed in my thought. So national consciousness replaced class consciousness and became fascism's Sorelian myth. As Mussolini said in a speech, "We have created our myth. The myth is a faith, a passion. It is not necessary for it to be a reality. It is a reality in the sense that it is a stimulus, is hope, is faith, is courage."
Do you follow where he's going here? Nationalism is going to be their myth.
Right.
But I was thinking while he was talking, like, what about the Empire of Britain?
Okay.
You don't think they have a lot of nationalism? You're going to become an officer, and you're going to travel all the way to the Middle East and sleep in mosquito blankets and do all this, so one day you can hold a higher post. And it was very, like, maybe they're just talking about the masses though.
Yeah.
Because you think about just some Brits in London, and they're just the lower class with a different accent. So he's just talking about the masses then.
Yeah, it seems like.
Okay, because the aristocracy was always nationalistic. Okay, well, that would make sense.
Our myth is the nation. Our myth is the greatness of the nation. So what became the bottom of fascism, the mobilizing idea that became the bottom of fascist ideology, was a passionate nationalism. So Mussolini collaborated with a circle of Italian intellectuals, notably around the magazine La Voce, and notably with the philosophy professor Giovanni Gentile. And they worked to develop a language and theory of fascism around nationalism, to turn nationalism into their mobilizing myth. And they did it by encouraging people to have a kind of mystical attitude about it. They said, if you close your eyes and you feel deep inside you, you can feel your nation down in your bones. You can feel the spirit of your country inside you. Here's Giovanni Gentile using that language. History is not a past that is of interest only to the erudite. It is present, alive in the soul of us all. Those who are Italians feel themselves a part of this Italy. They find themselves not only in the blue of its sky, in its hills and its water, nor only in the desolate or mountainous land that alternates with its fruitful plains and its smiling gardens. We close our eyes. Let us make abstraction from the horizons of its landscapes, so varied in beauty and light, and Italy remains in our soul. In fact, it enlarges and expands in the glory of that which it is. So they created this myth around the nation and treated it not just as a territory, but something spiritual. And then they talked about the nation in as passionate language as they possibly could. To give a shorter example, look at Mussolini describing his national identity here. He doesn't just call himself Italian. He says, "I am desperately Italian." I don't know about you, but I think that's about as emotional as you can get when you're talking about your country. National identity is something that all citizens of a country technically share. So what fascism tries to do is it tries to stir up the emotions of the public to get them to unite and rally behind the idea.
So patriotism, we call that nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh, you know what? This is interesting because when you look at like Trump people in their like trucks with the flags, fascists. I mean, if you're going to say nationalism is adjacent to fascism,
Right.
then patriotism is definitely adjacent to, if not synonymous with nationalism.
Sure. It's interesting as he just talks about the myth, and this is what our myth is going to be this, and I just keep thinking about what is the myth of America, that we bring freedom to the world and democracy, and they've just been given a blank check because everyone is bought in, and they do whatever they want to the rest of the planet because America.
Right. But also the founding myth of the United States is the Constitution, that we have these rights, that the constitutional rights that nobody else in the world has.
Okay.
And then they're selectively, once you become a little more jaded, you realize that they're just being selectively enforced.
Right.
It's like January 6ers, not in the same boat.
Right.
And then, same thing, like they're doing these, they're getting somebody right now they're trying to get him in jail for 4 months for not doing a subpoena. But you can go back like to Eric Holder, the Attorney General under Barack Obama, and he did the exact same thing, no crime.
Okay.
And so it's like you look at it and you're like, probably don't have these assurances you have.
Right.
Because when the boot comes to drop on you, okay, whatever.
It tries to sway the crowd using the myth of the nation. Something that's distinct about fascism, something that separates it from other versions of nationalism, is that for fascists, their nationalism is an overriding principle. It overrides all other traditional or moral or political concerns. Going back to this Mussolini quote, "Our myth is the nation. Our myth is the greatness of the nation." And then look what he says next. "And to this myth, this greatness, which we want to translate into a total reality, we subordinate everything else." That's actually an accurate description of fascism. If the question is, what does a fascist say or do? And we're talking about Italian or German fascism here. The answer is, whatever brings about the greatness of the nation. They say whatever they need to say, and they do whatever they need to do in order to bring about the greatness of the nation, at least in their minds.
What do you think about this?
I just feel like he's not leaving it open to what if someone is actually trying to make the nation great for everyone. It's all a fake thing that they're doing for their own power or whatever. I feel like that's how he's presenting it.
Right. And it's like, when I want to bring about the greatness of my nation, I start first in my house, raising my children and the way we conduct ourselves and socially, right?
Yeah.
And then you expand out from that to your community. You're doing it all for the country, America. You're doing it all for whatever, if you had a good country, we'll say.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean it's subordinate to. Sure, you're trying to work towards the interests of the betterment of the entire country. But that doesn't mean, because you wouldn't do that in a country where they say, can't go to church now anymore, Well, then cool. Now I'm not working towards it, right?
Okay.
Because I'm going to go against it. It just depends if the interests are in line.
The interest between who and who?
Between the government and the citizen.
Okay.
Because they say, whatever brings about the greatness of the nation. If we're actually talking about the greatness of a nation, then we're going to pick similar paths. The civilian and the government.
Are they?
No, not necessarily. It depends.
It's like everyone would have to agree on what the metrics are to define greatness, and then that's...
Yeah, it's far too vague. And I don't like where he said subvert moral, because you see where he's going with that.
Yeah, and the whole make it great, at least in his own eyes. Like, he's trying to make it a very subjective thing.
Right.
I feel like there are certain things that are absolute, that if the country has these things or these stats, then they're doing good.
Right.
Or they're great.
How much interest do you pay?
Right.
You're a great country.
Here's Mussolini describing the common goal between German and Italian fascism. The objective, which both wanted to achieve and have achieved, is the same: the unity and greatness of the people. So this is a two-part objective. Part 1 is to unify the people using the myth of the nation, and part 2 is to bring about the greatness of the people by bringing about the greatness of the nation. So then I think it's natural to ask, what do they mean by making the country great?
So it's not a myth if it's all coming to pass. I don't like the terminology.
I know. I've had a problem with that too. The myth of the nation. Because if I talk about the founding myth of America, oh, you mean founding history? You're talking about history. Like you're talking
Right.
about what happened between the time of the Articles of Confederation and the which also came right after the Revolutionary War. No, the history. Yeah, the history.
I mean, that whole sentence was make unity and then make the people great, which he did, and then he calls it a myth. No,
Right.
it was a real thing.
And at no point are they claiming that the myth is not true.
Right. Yeah. I'm not a fan of the terminology.
And fascists tended to leave that answer pretty vague. Here's Mussolini saying, "The nation is great when it translates into reality the force of its spirit." So this is a Hegelian idea. The idea that history is marked by stages, and those stages are defined by the human spirit. And going to Hegel now, spirit is the director of the events of the world's history. So spirit directs the world's history and drives it forward. So Italian fascists aspired to use the force of the Italian people to make an impact on the history of the world. If they did that, they would be translating into reality the force of the Italian spirit, which was supposed to make history, which was supposed to make Italy great and the Italian people great. To understand exactly how to do that, again, Italian fascists looked to Hegel, who Mussolini called the philosopher of the state. Hegel argued that in the history of the world, the only people that get noticed are the people that form a state, and that the state is the embodiment of the human spirit. It's the external manifestation of the will of people. So therefore, changes in the stages of world history are attached to the concept of the state. And if you haven't noticed, I have to edit Hegel a bit to make his writing clearer, because read as is, it's not. So anyway, so Hegel argued that you need a strong state in order to manifest the will of the people and embody the spirit of the nation and drive history forward. So then you might ask, what makes a state powerful? And here's Hegel's answer. A state is well constituted and internally powerful when the private interest of its citizens is one with the common interest of the state. So if the citizens and the state have identical interests, that makes the state powerful, which Hegel calls a desired harmony. He then says, the epoch, when a state attains this harmonious condition, marks the period of its bloom, its virtue, its vigor, and its prosperity. So according to this philosophy, the goal is to create a unity of interests between individuals and the state, so there's no conflict between individuals and the state. And if there is a conflict, then the state wins. As Hegel put it.
You see what he's doing here?
No.
He's saying the citizens have to have the same interests as the government. And if they do, then you're going to have perfect harmony and it will bloom and blossom. Just say the exact same thing, but say it backwards. If the state has the exact best interest of the people,
his hierarchy's wrong.
what are you going to get? Perfect harmony. It's going to bloom and blossom. You're going to get your unity. You're going to get your greatness. You're going to get your 98.5% approval rating. You're just saying it backwards. Flip it a little bit, and you got it. So he's misrepresenting Hegel's entire
framing.
thing.
Okay.
And if you look at it, he's just saying what we say every single episode. You need a system that's working only to the best interest of his people.
And he said it in this episode, in this video, that it is the people that, like, where the power and all that comes from. But yet he's now flipped it around.
Right.
That the state is priority.
And he's trying to say here too that, like, if there's a conflict between the interests of the state and the person, then the state has to fix it with the people. Like, jackboots are coming. We already know the history. There was no Gestapo because they didn't need any, because everybody was following the laws because the state was doing what the people wanted.
Right.
If the will of the people changes because of a new situation, then the state needs to change to affect that if they're still working towards the best interest of their people. And then unity, because once the people start to divert from that, if the state doesn't follow them, you lose your unity. You lose your 98.5%. You lose your greatness of the people. Right? Yeah. And the guy's close.
But it's hard to tell if it's on purpose or not.
It's hard to tell. It's because he's an intelligent guy. I can't believe you can't figure it out.
Yeah.
Just put the poll numbers with the League of Nations, watch them, and you figure it out pretty quick.
This unified state as an ultimate end possesses the highest right in relation to individuals, whose highest duty is to be members of the state. So Italian fascists were directly inspired by that philosophy. They saw the state as a means to their end of making the nation great, and thought that individuals should be subordinated to the needs of the state. What those needs were determined.
Yeah, and he made it up. And that last quote he said after we had got done talking, it said the highest duty of an individual is to become a member of the state, and actually is to become like a politician, like in the state.
Oh, okay.
And that would be my goal. If I lived in a good country, I would strive to be that guy who can also work for the best interest of people.
Right.
Right now, it's the criminals. There's a bunch of criminals there, and there are some good ones, but not a lot.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, if you're really trying to do this, then you're subordinate to the state. No, I want to go up there and serve. I would love to go serve, but I don't want to serve in this. You know, what am I doing?
Right.
Work for the FBI? Or like, you know what I mean? Yeah, make America great, justice, whatever.
Since it was a fascist state. So here's them saying that. The foundation of fascism, and by the way, the capital F here means Italian fascism, is the conception of the state, its character, its duty, and its aim. Fascism conceives of the state as an absolute, in comparison with which all individuals or groups are relative, only to be conceived of in their relation to the state. What we're seeing here is a justification for totalitarianism, having a powerful state with absolute right over the individual, a powerful state that subordinates the individual to it. So totalitarianism was a word that Italian fascists openly used. Look at how Mussolini talked about the rise of Nazi Germany in relation to Italy. Here is another great country in the process of creating a unitary, authoritarian, totalitarian state, i.e. a fascist one. Okay, so fascists wanted to unite the people using the myth of the nation. And then once the fascist movement came into power, they wanted to create a unitary, totalitarian state, a state with absolute power over its citizens with no political opposition. And then from there, they wanted to assert the spirit of their people on the world stage and therefore make history. Both Italy and Germany thought that process would create a new, glorious civilization, which Italy referred to as the Third Rome, and Germany referred to as the Third Reich. That being said, Italian fascism is often referred to as hollow. Italy had the language of fascism, but the execution wasn't really there. As one Italian historian put it, fascist Italy was something of a police state, but of an idiosyncratic kind, one where tyranny was tangled with compromise. And then later saying, for all its proclaimed totalitarianism, fascist Italy was soon shown to be unable to fully mobilize its civilians, or its ordinary soldiers, numbers of whom were unconvinced that their identities sprang from Italian nationality. Okay, so the Italian people didn't buy into fascism very heavily, and Mussolini was something of an impotent dictator. But we still have some loose ends here, namely, what exactly do fascists do once they get into power? What exactly are their policies? And again, in a nutshell, the answer is whatever they thought would bring about the greatness of the nation. One thing Italian fascists were consistent about, in both theory and in practice, was their attitude about violence and war, which again took inspiration from George Sorel. They saw violence as a legitimate political expression and extensively used violence on their way into power, which is something they shared with German fascists. They also glorified war. They saw war as something that would bind a country together, an attitude largely shaped by their experiences in World War I. They were also expansionist. They saw the expansion of the nation as an expression of vitality and strength, which led them to go around conquering weaker countries.
Wait a second. I mean, this is a common... He's acting like this is kind of like absurd what they're talking about. But we know that every country that's expanding is in an upswing and everyone that decreases is in a... Right?
Right.
So like if you say like America's on the rise, we're about to get a 51st state. It's not going to happen. Right?
Right.
And then you go back this... In every decade, Russia's getting something.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, makes sense.
The principle is clear. And if you go back and you talk about it contextually, you're talking about a time where people are picking up colonies and they're fighting for colonies. So there is expansion going. It's not like they're growing greater Italy, but they're increasing colonies and fighting over that constantly.
Notably Ethiopia and Libya, much to the detriment of the people living there. In terms of economic policy, Italy took a hybrid approach. Mussolini theorized about something that he called a corporate state, which was supposed to create a synthesis between liberalism and socialism. Or in other words, he wanted to create an alliance between capital and labor under fascist rule, which Italian fascists claimed abolished class conflict in Italy. Although how exactly that worked was far from clear. Regardless, it didn't do the Italian economy any favors. And while Mussolini was in power, Italy's economic growth fell further behind the powerful countries of Europe. On that note, there's been something of an ongoing war of categorization when it comes to fascism in that regard. People that are sympathetic to socialism try to push our understanding of fascism towards capitalism, and vice versa. People that are sympathetic to capitalism try to push fascism towards socialism. I think neither side ends up being very convincing, because both sides are only partially looking at the subject. It's true that fascists campaigned on socialist language and with socialist policies, but it's also true that fascism came out of capitalist economies. But the idea that fascism can only come out of capitalism, I think, comes from a partisan mindset. Moreover, once fascists came into office, they pursued hybrid economic policies. They weren't cleanly capitalistic and they weren't cleanly socialistic. They had elements of both. So for example, they might nationalize certain industries and implement a certain amount of welfare, but then also cozy up to big businesses and allow them a high degree of autonomy. So I think this aspect of fascism is sort of a conceptual cul-de-sac. I don't think it's an illuminating way to be able to categorize fascism. If anything, I think they were categorized by pragmatism. So they weren't dogmatic. Once they came into office, they pursued the policies they thought they needed to pursue to make the economy work. I think in particular that was true for Germany. So on that note, I think it's time to turn our attention away from Italy and towards Germany.
Okay, so that's halfway through.
Okay.
Now, I know you're more interested in the German part than the Italian part.
Kind of, but I know so little about it. It was interesting seeing what worked and didn't work.
I felt like you can't watch the part about Germany without seeing this part.
Totally.
Because you got to understand the roots of fascism when they're talking about having a myth, even though they were, and then about forwarding the greatness of a nation.
Yeah.
Because when you get the second half, and the second half is about the same length.
Okay.
And it's phenomenally better.
Okay.
But we're going to have to do that in the second part, of course.
Sure, totally.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so hopefully you enjoyed this look into Italian fascism and with the capital F. That was great. Very interesting.
Okay,
definitely not, I mentioned there's some things off the top of my head that really didn't sit right. I was presenting some things, but overall, very interesting and good food for thought. Well, if you guys enjoyed this, please check out tomorrow's video. We're going to be doing the second part of this and see the German side of this. And we'll see you then.